Someone once said to me that writing a short story is like a one-night stand and writing a novel is like a marriage. And I really think there is something to that little comparison. I was single for a long time because I hated the idea of being committed, of being stuck with someone, having to deal with all the confusing and tedious things required when you're working through shit with another person for days, months, years. I got enough problems without compounding them with another human being's problems. My issues with writing a novel were also about commitment and complexity. I guess I also think I naturally tend towards reading and writing short stories. I love the form, and I love how much you can experiment with a short story. And it's not a problem to write a whole bunch of stories in a single year. And it doesn't feel bad to drop a story that isn't working without getting the chest pains associated with losing years of your life. So fast forward some number of years, and here I am, married 5 years, 2 kids, and I'm on my second novel. Now let me leave my marriage issues with my therapist and focus on the trick I learned to commit to a big project like a novel. Now you're going to have to take this with a grain of meshugas, because I still find novel writing terrifying, and I'm just as terrified of writing novel 2 as I was for novel 1. But still, let me tell you how I changed my mindset. Making lists. That's it. That's my only trick. I make a shitload of lists. The end. What do these lists contain? Well, they kind of have everything. If I'm struggling with the plot of my novel, then I make a list of the plot elements to the story. If I'm confused about themes, then I make a list for that. Some of these lists are task-oriented lists, as in the 5 things that need to occur in this chapter. But most of the time, they're just informational lists, like 10 phrases that my character likes to say. These lists help me organize my life so that when I'm actually doing the task, I know what I'm doing and where I'm heading. Of course, I don't know exactly where I'm heading, but I have a rough direction for that month or week or just the day. And that's all I want, just a rough direction, some rough intention to chill me out so I can get to work. But it's more than just list making. There are rules that I have for these lists. First of all, I need a method to access these lists from everywhere. For me as a geek, I write down all my lists in text files, and I sync them with all my devices and computers. You could just as easily do this by carrying around a notebook everywhere, or just never leaving the house. Whatever it is, I think the key is to minimize the effort required to access these lists and maximize the places where you can access them. The next rule is to organize these lists in an intuitive way, whether that's with files in a folder, or lists within a file, or different piles on your desk. Whatever it is, it just has to be very obvious which list is in which location. I have a specific file full of lists about each novel I'm working on. I have a specific file for the marketing aspect of my writing life. I have a specific file for the lists that are more like tasks that I need to accomplish. The next rule, the last rule, the most important rule, is to review the shit out of these lists. Reviewing the lists helps in several ways for me. For one, if a list becomes obsolete, then I know to dump it and get it out of my sight. Also, the reviewing helps to clean up the lists before they get too confusing or overwhelming. Actually, I'm pretty harsh about keeping my list short. I like to keep them about 10 items. If it's more than 15, that's usually a sign that I'm making things too complicated or I need to break it into more lists. Even when I'm plotting out a whole novel, I just want a rough direction to keep me going the next day. I make sure my lists are always short and they're never intimidating. Because it's more than just making sure the lists are accurate. There's an important emotional component to them. You want these lists to make you feel like your projects, no matter how big they are doable right here and right now. Another reason to review the list is that it'll help place these items into your consciousness so that you remember them along the way. For instance, if I read over the list of things that motivate the main character of my novel, then when I get to my novel, hopefully I'll have some of those things in my head as I proceed. So that sums it up at a high level. Y'all are just lucky that I didn't show you any of my marriage-related lists. Now those are some sexy lists.